count. Do you start the count?
And it started.
All right. Good afternoon. Thank you for joining our program today. It is our pleasure to welcome you to our keynote event in recognition and celebration of Asian American and Pacific Islander Heritage Month. We are excited to kick off the event with opening remarks from the Honorable Gina Ortiz Jones, Undersecretary of the Air Force. We are grateful for her for taking the time to join us this afternoon. And without any further delay, Undersecretary Jones, the floor is yours.
Great. Well, good afternoon. And thank you, Major Lee. Thank you, Captain Whitlock, for putting this together. I know these things don't just happen, right? And I know this is extra time away from certainly your duties and from your time and families. I really want to thank you because these types of celebrations are really so important. And when I think about these types of events, certainly as a member of the AAPI community, I just always think about how important it is that these events help people feel seen, right, and recognized for their contributions. So I want to thank you from the bottom of my heart. I also want to thank the other panelists, Ed Oshiba, Major General Dunstan, Brigadier General Canlas, as well as Chief. I'm going to try to not butcher this, but Skibitsky. Hopefully, I got that.
This meeting is being recorded.
Okay, and the meeting is being recorded. Got it. For taking time out of, again, your very busy schedules to share your experiences and across the force. So I really appreciate the opportunity to join y'all as we kick off Asian American Pacific Islander Heritage Month. This month is important not only because it allows us to celebrate the many contributions of Asian Americans and Pacific Islanders, but more importantly, this month also allows us to share our rich and diverse cultures with all airmen and guardians. The Department of the Air Force values the contributions of every airman and guardian. Many of you have shared your experiences with us through the disparity reviews and through the work of the barrier analysis working groups. And across the department, we are working hard to remove any barriers that stand in your way and make sure that we are the most lethal force, the most lethal department of the Air Force that we can be. And so certainly Secretary Kendall and I are wholly committed to seeing that you and every member of our team and certainly your family members are able to serve to your full potential. I am proud to count myself among the 13% of all U.S. military veterans that are either foreign-born or first-generation Americans. And as I reflect back on my own service, I think of my family's own history. My mom came to this country from the Philippines over 40 years ago. She graduated from the #1 university in the Philippines, but the opportunity to come to the U.S. presented itself, and she was offered an opportunity to come here as a domestic helper. And she jumped at it because she knew that even if she came to this country, even in that capacity, if she was willing to work hard, the sky's the limit. So she wanted her shot at the American dream, and she certainly reminded my sister and I every single day that we were lucky, not smart, lucky to be born in this very special country, and we'd have to give back to a country that had given us so much. So why I serve, why I continue to serve, why my sister proudly serves in the Navy to this day. She will tell you she's a proud member of the Filipino Mafia in the Navy. I tried to get her in the Air Force, but you know, whatever big sis wants, little sis is going to do the exact opposite. So that's where we are. But very proud that she is continuing to serve to this day. And our service actually also starts with my Uncle Brig, Prefecto Menelia Ortiz. He was actually part of the Navy Steward Program. And for those of you that might not be familiar, this was a special program that existed between the U.S. and the Philippines. And he was recruited in the late 60s to join the U.S. Navy from the Philippines. This was for Filipino men. And at the time, their career opportunities were really restricted to just a handful of career opportunities. But he would go on to serve for 20 years and would retire as a electrical engineer. But again, you know, even understanding how limited his career opportunities might be, he was so inspired, just like my mom, and I think like many of your own family members, at the chance at American dream. And so when I think about my own service, when I think about my family's service, I think about how important it is that we continue to ensure that those opportunities are there for those behind us, as we understand just how important our example continues to be across the world. So I am humbled every single day when I walk into the Pentagon, and I finally have to kind of pinch myself right? Because in just one generation, we've gone from the daughter of somebody who came here as a domestic helper. We've gone from, again, the niece of somebody who came here as part of the steward program to the 27th Undersecretary of the Air Force. So when I think about kind of what I am charged with, my responsibility to make sure that, again, anybody ready and willing, courageous enough to serve their country can have the opportunity to do so, because not only is it certainly in the best interest of the country as we think about our pacing challenge, we just don't have time or talent to lose, but really we've got to tap into the full talent across the force. So I'm very humbled to be able to serve in this position, and I certainly understand the responsibilities with ensuring that we remove those barriers that prevent us from tapping into the full talent across the force. So with that, I know you want to get to the panel. Again, thank you for allowing me just a couple of minutes to open up the event. And I wish you, again, a wonderful Asian American Pacific Islander Heritage Month. Thank you.
Great. Thank you so much, ma'am, for your words of wisdom. As a fellow Filipina, I'm personally very honored to get to speak with you. So truly appreciate you taking the time to join us today. So everybody else, good afternoon. I am Captain Joanne Whitlock, Operations Officer for the 628th Logistics Readiness Squadron in Joint Base Charleston, South Carolina, and I'll be one of your moderators for today's event. We welcome all of you who are joining us online to take part in this year's Department of the Air Force's opening event for Asian American and Pacific Islander Heritage Month. Our theme for this month and today's program is Wayfinding the Future. And what better way to lay the foundation of our future than to learn from some of those that have paved the way forward. We are very fortunate to have with us today senior leaders from the AAPI community serving at distinguished levels of our department.
I am Major Peter Lee, the Program Analyst for the Combat Support Portfolio, working out of Air Force Installation and Mission Support Center, Joint Base San Antonio, Lackland, Texas. While not on the call with us today, I would also like to recognize our final co-chair for this month's compilation of events, and that is Mr. Chris Ryan Borso, currently serving as the Affirmative Employment Program Manager at Edwards Air Force Base, California. Today's event is a celebration of the heritage and achievements of Asian American and Pacific Islander Airmen and Guardians. Today's ceremony is hosted by the Office of the Secretary of the Air Force, and we appreciate the Undersecretary Jones as she was able to spend a few minutes with us this afternoon and really open up the conversation. So now I would like to take a few minutes to showcase a video highlighting some of the amazing airmen and guardians we have representing our community. And after the video, we will introduce our distinguished panelists joining us for today's event.
I am actually a mixed race. So my mother is from Papua New Guinea and my father is actually Filipino.
So we have a rich military background. My grandfather, Alejandro Ramos, is a World War II vet and survivor of the Bataan Death March. My father served 24 years in the Air Force, retired as a Master Sergeant.
My dad came here in the US in 1986, and then my mom followed in 1996, and I was here a year later.
I was born and raised in Japan until leaving for the University of Iowa at the age of 20, where I earned my commission through their Air Force ROTC detachment.
My grandparents were part of the partition between India and Pakistan in 1947, and it was one of the largest mass migrations in human history.
I am Itau K, an indigenous person to the Fiji Islands. My Koroni Vasu, where I have my traditional maternal links, is to the Kora or village of Nassau, one of 2 villages in the island of Mode.
So I was adopted out of China. I'm from Xingyi City, Guangdong, China. It's southeastern China, more near Hong Kong down there.
What is it about my heritage that makes me unique? I think the thing that makes me unique is that there aren't that many Papua New Guineans in the United States. In fact, it's a very small diaspora.
You know, I think my heritage is a big part of who I am as a person, and it's something that I've tried to instill in my children now that I'm a parent and we have a family.
The number one thing is I never felt inferior because of my minority. Like, I was always really proud of the fact that, you know, my parents are from Pakistan and that they speak another language, and I loved people learning about my culture and wanting to learn more about me and my culture.
Over 40 years ago, my parents then arrived to the United States, and I genuinely admire their ability to assimilate to America while preserving their rich South Asian cultures.
I would say the biggest challenge that I've faced is not really finding people like me. You know, I've had to, in my life, explain who I am, what I am, and really to find that commonality with other people.
Sometimes, well, I wouldn't say sometimes, a lot of times, you're the only woman in the room, the only minority, the only Asian American. So there's sometimes that pressure to make sure that you represent your unit well, you represent your family well, your culture well.
Because even though I grew up here, you know, I came from a household where my parents didn't speak English very well. So I learned English from Sesame Street and from Mr. Rogers. And then when I went to school, that's when I practiced English. So just being able to communicate was probably one of the biggest challenges.
And then also recognize that we don't have that much representation in a lot of different places. So whether that be media or other places where, you know, even Asians as a whole aren't represented. That's something that I'm growing to be conscious about after I graduated college, and I still am kind of working on being better for. So,
an important aspect of celebrating our heritage and culture is acknowledging the brilliance of those that have come before us and their way of life. Their knowledge, skill sets, value systems, beliefs, and traditional links have shaped and influenced us, how we think, how we relate, and how we live our lives today.
When we first came to America, the first thing I saw was a military base, Fort Hood. I was a military brat, and I saw the life that the military had to offer, and it's really one of the things that I have.
It's not something that I nor anyone in my family expected to do, but you know, but I felt the calling to you know, volunteer and serve.
So I decided to serve because we have that history of military service, and also for a way to me to say thanks to this country. It gave us an opportunity to come to America and to build a better life.
A feeling of wanting to give back to a country that that really given so much to me and my family. Just the opportunities.
We came here for the American dream, and really for us, the American dream is what you make of it, right? And I feel that putting on this uniform, you know, is our way of saying thank you.
But my story is just one of the thousands of millions of children that were saved, that we can advocate to make life better. And if we can help those kids, that'd be great. And it's the same way that I view the Air Force. If we can help just make people better human beings so they can be better leaders, be better airmen, NCOs, senior NCOs, officers.
Everyone comes from a different place with different experiences and backgrounds. And I think it's the ability to tell that story and get to know each other that really makes the U.S. Air Force and Space Force such an awesome place to be.
The SECAF, the CSAF, Chief Bass, they always talk about the importance of diversity and inclusion, and that's our strength. And but we can't build from that if we don't know about it. So I'd say learn about everybody that's out there, and you know, that's what's going to lead to us having a bigger and better Air Force.
All right, thank you so much to Staff PA for that incredible video highlighting the diversity and culture that this community brings to the department. And thank you to everyone out there who contributed to telling their great stories. Here today to provide senior leader perspective on being a member of a diverse demographic community is Mr. Edwin Oshiba, Acting Assistant Secretary of the Air Force for Energy, Installations, and Environment. He is also one of our senior leader champions for the Pacific Islander and Asian American Community Team, or PACT, a part of the Department of the Air Force's Barrier Analysis Working Group. Also with us is Major General Floyd Dunstan, the Air National Guard Assistant to the Commander, Air Education and Training Command. Brigadier General Jimmy Canlas, Commander of Defense Logistics Agency Energy. And Chief Master Sergeant Hope Skibitsky, the Air Force Installation and Mission Support Center Command Chief. Panelists, to kick off today's discussion, we would like each of you to please introduce yourselves to include where you grew up and your family heritage, perhaps a favorite activity relating to your culture, and how you think your background has contributed to your success as a DAF leader. We request that each of you try to capture these thoughts into 3 minutes each. Mr. Oshiba, please start us off.
Hey, thanks, Joanne. And again, thank you for the entire team for putting this thing together. What a way to kick off the month. And certainly all of the hard work that you all put into this is going to pay off, and being able to communicate, I think, what the diverse strengths that this community brings to a much broader Department of the Air Force. And so, hey, just real quick, Ed Oshiba, I grew up on the Big Island of Hawaii in a small town called Hilo. So my story starts out kind of like, I think, many others that were part of my hometown. You know, my dad kind of gave me some really good advice. Actually, it was direction when I was graduating high school. He said, "Hey boy, whatever you do, you cannot stay here on this island. You gotta leave." And that was his only direction. You gotta leave. And so he said, "Hey, you should try to join a service or something. Maybe learn something about how to fix airplanes or whatever, right?" So I actually enlisted in the Navy, in the Navy's late entry program. I was supposed to go be a nuclear submarine technician until I figured out where nuclear submarines work or operate. And so I got an ROTC scholarship through the Air Force, went to school in Santa Clara, California, graduated, and then joined up. And I had no intention to stay in past 4 years. I was going to do my commitment. I was in the civil engineer squadron. They sent me to Kunsan, Korea, at about my 3.5-year point. And everything else kind of fell into place from there. I learned what mission was all about, and what it was like to serve from that one assignment. And I really haven't looked back since. I retired back in 2015 and decided I wanted to continue serving. And so I transitioned over to the civilian side of the house, and still continue to serve to this day. And I'll tell you that, the one thing that I kind of make myself do every morning is I get up and I say, am I still having fun? Am I still enjoying what I do? And as long as I can truthfully say yes, then I'll come to work, because I feel like I'm going to contribute something to a much bigger team, and hopefully I can continue doing that for a while. So I really appreciate the opportunity, Joanne, and I'm looking forward to really hearing the rest of the stories.
Awesome. Thanks, Mr. Oshiba. Really appreciate you telling that story. General Dunstan, over to you.
All right. My name is Floyd Dunstan. Let's see, I was a military brat, so sort of grew up all over the place. My mom came from Japan when she was in her early 20s. And my dad met her over here. And then shortly thereafter, I appeared on this planet. Lived in North Dakota, Travis Air Force Base, Kadena Air Force Base, Lowry Air Force Base. And so grew up as a military brat. When I was in 7th grade, my dad retired from the Air Force, and we moved back to Denver, Colorado. They enjoyed that when they were stationed here previously. I got one sister. I went to the Air Force Academy, graduated in '87, so that was quite a ways back, and then spent 11 years in the active duty. It's a little bit non-standard career. I spent 11 years in the Marine Corps. I was an F-18 guy, and then I got out and joined the Colorado Air National Guard, became an F-16 guy, and then about a year ago, I got sent down to ATC to do this job work for Lieutenant General Webb. Probably being a Japanese American, one of the favorite things that I get to do, because my mom's still around. She's 88 years old and still works 30 hours a week, no kidding, is that she gets to cook for me and the family. I haven't figured out how to train my wife to become a Japanese cook yet, but my mom does a good job doing that. And I guess one of the biggest things growing up in that environment is family. We spent a lot of time growing up together as a family. I've tried to do the same thing with the relatives I have here in the state, my sister and her family, and then my children. So I'm really excited to be here to talk about some of the issues that we have on the AAPI side of the house. And I really think the Air Force is going down the right road in what they're doing with DNI and everything else. So thanks a lot.
All right, thank you, sir, for that personal insight. What about you, General Canlas?
Hi, good afternoon, everyone. Thanks, Joanne, and thanks, Peter, for this opportunity, and thanks to the other panelists. I feel honored to be here with you. So, you know, a little bit of my story is not unlike you probably heard on some of the videos. I was a Navy brat, so you know, my parents are both Filipino. My father came in through the program that the under mentioned earlier, joining the U.S. Navy. But prior to that, you know, my grandfather also served as a Philippine scout and also in the U.S. Army, and also was a survivor of the Bataan Death March. So my dad was in the Navy, as I mentioned earlier. He was a Seabee and spent a lot of my years overseas growing up in the Philippines. And until I was 18 years old, grew up right outside of Clark Air Base, enjoyed watching the F-4s and F-5s making a lot of noise on top of me. And I kept on looking up each and every day and said, I want to do that one day. And so that's where kind of my interest and passion for flying came. But I knew that I wasn't going to be able to accomplish my dream of flying by staying in the Philippines. So I convinced my mom to allow me to go to college in the United States. And, you know, we knew it was going to be a big leap of faith, a big financial commitment, but got her sold and went to University of Texas San Antonio and managed to go through the ROTC program, earn my commission, pilot slot, and then 30 years later, here I am. And so, you know, very, very, you know, proud of, you know, that story and where we came from. You know, one of the favorite things, as you asked earlier about the favorite things about culture, one of them is in the Philippine culture is eating with our hands, right? We're one of the few Asian cultures that don't use chopsticks. So, you know, quick story about that. When I was a wing commander at Charleston, I invited my boss, the 18th Air Force commander at the time, was a 3-star, him and his wife, you know, to have dinner at our house during his base visit. And I basically put on a boodle fight, put basically a bunch of food out on the table with banana leaves. And I said, the only rule, sir, is you cannot use any silverware. You must eat with your hands. And it was a gutsy move. I'm glad it worked, though. He really enjoyed the evening. Otherwise, I may not have been standing here today. But, you know, great opportunity for him to be able to experience a little bit of our culture. But, you know, when you talk about things that help, you know, contribute to success, I think growing up in the Philippines, when I you know, seeing the time of martial law, being surrounded by poverty. Now, I will admit, you know, as a Navy brat and retiree, right, we were better off than others, but, you know, still saw a lot of poverty around us. And so I learned how to count my blessings pretty quick. And so when I got here to the United States, people are always wondering, you know, why are you so motivated? Why are you volunteering for so many things? And it was just, I think it was just kind of embedded at me at that point. You know, I just saw opportunities and I didn't want them to pass me by. And so, you know, I knew I always wanted to serve. So it was not really if it was a matter of if I joined the Air Force, it was just a matter of when I joined the Air Force. And so, again, that happened when I was able to go through the ROTC program at UTSA. So thanks, Joanne, back to you.
Thanks, General Canlas, and appreciate everything that you do for the entire community. So kudos to you. Chief, over to you to close us up.
So hello, everybody. Hope Skibitsky. It really is a privilege for me to be here with all of you. So thanks for having me. I am Polynesian, Hawaiian specifically, and white. My dad's family is of German descent, and my mom's family is Native Hawaiian. For those of you who don't know, Hawaiian is actually a race. So we are of the Hawaiian race. And so I came from a military family, but don't really remember it. My dad retired from the military just before I turned 5. And so he was a retired E6 with 6 kids and an unemployed spouse. So living in Hawaii was not feasible. So we moved to Texas. And so I spent my developmental years kind of being a Texas nomad. We lived a little bit of everywhere across the state. But my story about joining is probably a little more reflective of some of our enlisted corps. I was actually a teenage runaway, and so had a lot of adversity to deal with. And so the Air Force was sort of my saving grace. And so I joined the military so that I could build a future. And it has done incredibly well for me. And so I didn't have a lot of knowledge about my Hawaiian culture or background, but I've had the privilege of learning that since I've been growing up. But one of the things that I really have enjoyed about it is having discovered May Day or Lay Day, which is kind of where culture meets pageantry. And if anybody knows anyone from Texas, you understand that there is a flavor for pageantry. So it kind of gives me the best of both worlds. And so I've been really excited about learning that piece of the culture. And I have been super excited about the way that our military inculcates educating other people about our different cultures and how that makes us stronger. So I'm excited to get into the conversation, and I look forward to working alongside all of you.
Got to learn to unmute. That's what I got to do first. Thanks, Chief, and thanks to all the panel members for briefly sharing your personal thoughts. For today's engagement, we have some questions that are tailored specific to each of the panelists. We invite the remaining panelists to also join the conversation should time allow. So, Chief, we'll start back with you again since we ended with you first. So your interaction with your own culture is unique. You and I talked previously, and you told me about how your ancestral culture was not really inherent in your family upbringing, and you kind of just alluded to that as well. But you learned a lot of it through your own experiences as you navigated through your adult life. With the Air Force being the critical catalyst to your identification with the Hawaiian culture, I'm curious to know, what have you observed in the ebb and flow of how the Air Force delivers its Heritage Month activities? And over that time, has anything changed for you since your development of cultural appreciation at your first duty assignment?
Great question, sir. And yes, absolutely. So I grew up in a family where my mother, being of the Hawaiian race and marrying my father, who was stationed at Wheeler in Oahu when he met my mother, there was quite a bit of consternation in the family that my mother had married what is deemed to be a haole, which wasn't incredibly interesting to my mom's family. So we weren't brought into a lot of the Hawaiian culture, and so I didn't learn a lot about it. And to tell you the truth, when I joined the military, I don't recall in the early stages there being any sort of exploration of diversity or even diversity months. They may have existed, I just don't recall it. However, when I got stationed at Lakenheath, I had the privilege of my sponsor being married to a Hawaiian man, and she was telling me about the Asian Pacific Islander Association at Lakenheath. And so they invited me to a picnic, and I had the chance to go, and there were dances, and there was food, and there was family. And it was probably the first time in my young adult life that I had the opportunity to see what the Hawaiian culture was about, but not just the Hawaiian culture. I learned a lot about a lot of different Asian cultures, but it was interesting to me to learn about Hawaiian dance and food and all of that stuff. And I don't know that I would have ever had the opportunity if AAPI hadn't existed within the walls of the military, because I just didn't learn about it at home. And so over time in the military, I've seen it transition from a monthly celebration to sort of a diversity day, where everything was sort of truncated into one day. And I feel like maybe it lost some of its message through translation, because it was all kind of crammed together, and it was like a day and then it was done, and everybody was kind of like, "Ooh, I'm glad that's over with." And we didn't do much teaching or learning. It just sort of came and went like a flash in the pan. And so over time, I've seen those months start to roll back out, and I've seen the excitement of each of the different communities in spending the entirety of the month helping educate our brothers and sisters in arms about what each of our respective cultures are and do, and what we bring to our different services, and how we make each other better and stronger. And so at the risk of just being like incredibly verbose here, I know for a fact I wouldn't have learned about Hawaiian dance, Hawaiian food. I mean, things that I missed out on because of my mother's separation from her family. I didn't get a lot of as a child. I learned it all from my Air Force family, and I'm just super, super glad for it.
I think that's a unique tale too, especially as we celebrate the month's events. You know, some people might not even see it as an opportunity to just dive deeper into what you already know, and in your case, you didn't know. And so I'm really glad that we're able to get this opportunity to really talk about these things. We have a few moments if anyone else wants to ask anything or provide further clarification. Did anyone else have a similar experience or anything they want to elaborate on? I don't want to call anyone out, but no, if not, no worries. We got lots of questions for the panelists. So I'll turn it over to Captain Whitlock to ask the next question.
Yeah, thank you so much, Chief, for that, providing that perspective of how D&I has just evolved throughout your career. So obviously I only know as much as my career, so it's really nice to see that insight. General Canlas, you're up next. So as a command pilot and joint qualified officer with some incredible leadership experiences in your resume, Airmen and Guardians can learn a lot from what you have done throughout your years of service, just rising through the ranks. What are your recommendations for military and civilian leaders trying to bring their full capabilities to the table in today's operating environment?
Yeah, thanks, Joanne, for that question. And it's interesting. I like what you actually, the way you ended that question is, in today's operating environment, right? Because today's operating environment is different. If you look back at from where we were, even when I entered the service, back in the 90s. I hate to say that, it kind of hurts me a little bit, but it is complex, right? We live in a joint world. We live in a coalition type world. We live in a world that we know that if we move from competition into conflict, that we're not going to do it alone, right? And so with that, I think it rolls right into how we're stronger together, not only with coalition partners, but even within our own service, right? Even between Airmen and Guardians on how we bring that together. So a lot of times, I always say, look in the mirror first and try to assess, what do we bring to the team? I think this applies to anyone, right? It doesn't necessarily have to be, an Asian American background, but what do you bring to the team and what are your talents? But when you do that, though, also balance that out and try to have an honest conversation. Is what is your passion? Because culturally, at least I know it is in the Philippine culture, right? And I don't want to speak for other cultures, but there are certain things that you need to do to be considered successful, right? Doctor, lawyer, engineer, nurse. If you're not one of those four, you're technically not successful. It took a long time, even in my own life, for my mom to understand of my dream to fly airplanes, and it took her about 3 years after me being in the Air Force and after earning my wings. Up until that point, she still called me an engineer, because she didn't know how to explain it to her friends. It was almost like a little bit derogatory that she was saying, "Oh, my son's a pilot." She was, and there's nothing wrong with those other career fields, right? But that was my passion, and so sometimes we have to learn that we need to live our own dreams, right? Not the dreams of our parents, oftentimes, and we have to be willing to step away from that, right? And so we know that looking in the rearview mirror, you can't change it, you can't change your past, and so there's no need to hide it. Right. And so I think with that, right, we just need to continue to embrace that. Going back to my first point of, knowing what you bring to the fight, and then use that background, you use that, experience for good, for the good of our country, for the good of our services, for our airmen, for our guardians out there, for our wingmen. I think, if you apply that each and every day and just remember that, I don't have to necessarily, I can't change my past. I am who I am, but I could use this for the good to influence the future. I think we'd all be, in a better place. But I didn't hit unmute quick enough, so I'm going to circle back on Chief's initial comment earlier on D&I events, if that's okay. All right, okay, I got a north-south. So, so Chief brought up, about the D&I events. So, as a young lieutenant / captain, my first assignment at Scott Air Force Base, I put on, a couple of these Asian Pacific Islander heritage events, right? And I'm glad to see how we've evolved throughout the years, because I think for a long time we were kind of caught in this little do loop of, okay, let's do the karate demonstration, let's do the hula dance, let's cook some lumpia, and then we'll all get together. But we never really got to the tough conversations. So I'm glad that we have forums such as these to be able to get what I coined hashtag beyond lumpia, right? We need to get one step beyond that to have those conversations. And I'm glad that we have forums such as these. Over.
No, great advice, sir. Thank you so much for that. What you were talking about actually reminds me of a Joe Coy skit. I'm sure you've seen Joe Coy, where his mom tells him he needs to be a nurse. So that's exactly what I was talking about, thinking about. And I definitely have felt that experience of self-reflection of what is successful, because as you say, I'm Filipino myself, and there is definitely certain career fields that are prioritized higher in our culture. Definitely taking some notes for myself, so thank you for that, sir. Mr. Oshiba, over to you. As our Pacific Islander and Asian American community team champion, what can you share about the current status of our community as it fits into the larger whole of the department? And what do you hope to see moving forward from here?
Hey, Joanne, that's a great question, but I got to go back to what General Canlas said. So I wrote down beyond, like, hashtag Beyond Lumpia. That's pretty good. I won't ever have to remember that one. And maybe to kind of build on some of the comments we just heard, so I've been around a while. And like I think many others, we've kind of seen sort of how we celebrate our diversity in different ways. And growing up in Hawaii, food was always something that kind of brought us together. And so, food is always good, right? That's a good thing to bring people together. But I think maybe to build a bit on some of the comments earlier, it's really good to see us moving forward or evolving to a place where we can have forums where we can start to talk about some of the things that maybe are a little bit uncomfortable to talk about, right? I mean, challenges that we've all faced, hurdles that we've had to come over, stereotypes that we've had to overcome, whatever that might be. It's good to see that these forums are now starting to build, and I see them on Facebook or on other social media platforms, and that's really awesome to see. One of the things that I sit on the Chiefs Diversity and Inclusion Council. We meet once a month, and every so often he brings all of the co-champions together. And I think a couple of things that I've seen that are really, really encouraging. So one, we have 7 barrier analysis working groups. This is just one of 7. I've never seen that much sort of attention being put on these different kinds of demographics in the Department of the Air Force, at least in my 33 years. And so that is encouraging. The fact that we are spending time to really understand what the data is telling us. And we talked a little bit about the racial diversity reports and other things that we've done to understand factually using data, where do we actually see these issues cropping up, so we can focus our efforts on those specific things, understand causal factors, and get after that. That's really encouraging. And I think the last thing I would say that I'd like to see us as a team or as a group, and not just the PAC, but really all of the other BOGs kind of focus in on is what are we doing to sort of institutionalize the momentum we have today, so that when we all leave, when we all get replaced, when we all move on, this movement continues on, and it continues to grow, and we continue to bring awareness to just the value that all these different diverse groups bring. And it's not just how we look, but the experiences we have and what we can bring, again, to really not just the department, but really all of the Air Force and all of the nation. The last thing I'd leave you with is a saying that I often give during in my first director's calls or commander's calls, whatever you want to call them. I really truly mean this. Everyone has value. Everyone. Sometimes it's a little tough to find it, right? Sometimes you got to kind of dig around or ask, or sometimes that value might be misplaced. But everybody has value, and if you're a leader, your job is to find out what everybody's value is and maximize that value for the good of the entire team. That's what leaders do. And again, it's really good to see us kind of taking a bit of time to focus on that, and watching it again evolve through this forum and others. So great question, Joanne.
Thanks, Mr. Oshiba. And that's some very good comments. And I think the biggest thing moving forward is, like you were saying, how do we make sure that this continues into antiquity is exactly what we're doing right now, is educating our force and keeping people in tuned on what's going on around them. So no, appreciate your dialogue. General Dunstan, did you have anything that you wanted to add to any of the previous comments? I saw you come off mic.
Yeah, I guess, well, one thing is that, how do you bake this in so that once we all retire, move on, et cetera, it continues. And I think that's what the younger generation, what they're doing with young folks that join the Air Force before they even show up to BMT. They're trying to reach out and for lack of a better term, indoctrinate them on, the correct behavior. Then when they go to BMT, they do training. Then when they get to their first unit, they continue on training with the rest of the Air Force. And that's how that young generation, hopefully when we leave, they saw the benefit of this, the goods, and they'll carry this on in the future. I think that's what we got to count on in the future for the Air Force.
Definitely point taken, and I wholeheartedly agree. Does anyone else have anything to add before we move on to General Dunstan, your last moderated question?
All right, my question was, how has the Guard evolved with the challenges of ensuring we have better diversity, equity, and inclusion for our force? So I'll answer that question first. For the last 10 plus years, all states have had what we call the Joint Diversity and Inclusion Group. And that's been mandated by the National Guard Bureau, similar to the Air Force staff level DNI. And so those organizations within the state, every state has one, is responsible for looking at those issues within the Army and the Air National Guard, or the Army and the Air National Guard in, for example, Colorado. And I know it's been going along at least for 10 years because I was involved with that when I was at the wing and above. And so, they look at the training, the education, make sure that in accordance with TAG direction, who runs the Air National and Army National Guard in the state, that we are, including diversity, inclusion, and equity in everything we do, whether it's hiring practices, recruiting, et cetera, force management, force development. And I think that, really these programs have gained a lot of momentum, a couple of years ago because of the George Floyd incident. That's what sort of the catalyst, in my opinion, that really stepped up, going to the next stage, next level from just having, a barbecue here during May, eating Japanese food, to let's talk about real issues. Okay. And that's a good thing. Okay. And, some other examples are in the Air Force, what they've done, if you look down at AATC, if you have an opportunity to look at General Webb's Real Talks, where he brought in the different groups and had those honest conversations about, what the issues were for those specific groups. And that's educational because as leaders, and not just leaders, women in the Air Force, you need to know the folks that you're dealing with and working with side by side. A follow-on question would be that, how do the different components deal with that, and who's got an advantage or disadvantage? I would say that, the Guard, we have folks that are there for quite a long time, and I'm on the tail end of that, in that I've been in the Colorado Air National Guard since 1998. So I'm a true homesteader. But, you'll have young guys and gals show up to guys and gals that were prior active service. They did 6-10 years in active duty, then joined the Guard. And so you got a little bit more time to mold those people and educate those people, I think, and develop them how you want to. And that's a benefit, I think. Also, another benefit of the Guard is that you develop relationships with people. I mean, I've been around some folks for 20 plus years, and I think I figured them out. And we get along, and it's easier to include those folks, right? To be inclusive with somebody for a long time by somebody that you've met for 6 months and they roll out of there. Okay, that's a problem I think the active duty has, but that's just the animal it is, right? And we need to be able to go ahead and deal with that. And by having a program that's Air Force wide, that will hopefully take care of that problem with guys, moving every 2 or 3 years. And then I guess the last question I had was that, how does every individual in the Air Force and in the Space Force, military or civilian, help ensure that, we have diversity, inclusion, and equity? And I think that is just purely an education piece. And it's multifaceted in that it's the the boring briefing. It's things such as this Facebook Live event. It's It's real talks like they did at AATC over this last couple of years. It's make it into our hiring practices, our recruiting. You know, when we look at different groups where we want to move the needle as far as race, gender, etc., on who we want to bring in the force. It's the rated diversity program. There's all these programs that we have in the Air Force that really have come of being in the last 3 or 4 years, and we need to keep pushing those. And I think that's how you change the force over time.
Okay, thank you, sir, for giving us that total force perspective. So I'm not sure if you know, Major Lee and I actually had a stint together at the National Guard Bureau a couple of years ago. We were both at NGBA 4. So, and I don't think we realized so much efforts and DNI efforts were being implemented on that side. So thank you for that perspective. I believe we still have a little bit more time. So this question is open to any panel member to answer. As the United States evolves and tries to become a more welcoming place for all different types of cultures and individual identities, how can DAF leaders foster environments to promote these individual identities while ensuring that airmen and guardians of all races and all beliefs respect each other and work together to accomplish a mission? Open to anybody.
All right,
Hey,
I'll
I'm
break the
glad
ice
to-
and then we'll see who jumps in.
You go first, sir.
Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead, Chief. You've heard me talk enough. Go ahead, Chief. I'm not going to say anything.
Chief, over to you.
Okay, thank you. I was just going to take a stab at it, right? Like, we are an incredible conglomerate of different makeups across our United States. And because we've always welcomed, people from all walks of life to join our military, I think that we are getting better about expressing who we are and identifying why we're good for making better teammates. I think what we have to do is just continue to have tough conversations till they're not tough anymore, right? Like, make people understand that it's okay for us to come from different cultures as long as we all have the same core values. And so I think that continuing to focus on how our core values get us toward one team is the way that we do this going down the road, right? Like, making sure that every single airman, whether they be active duty, guard, reserve, civilian, understands what it is we're aiming for. And then they can line up their own personal values or their culture that comes with that toward the core value that we're using to get after our everyday mission. I think it's important that we recognize, though, when small steps were taken, and I promise I won't get so tangential here, but when we look at the fact that the Hawaiian government, like the monarch, was actually illegally overthrown. And for a long time, there was hard feelings about that, and people just were, they were mad. And then when President Clinton took the first step to actually write a formal apology and say, hey, look, that was wrong, and we shouldn't have done it. Like, a lot of people took a big, deep breath and said, to be heard sometimes is what we wanted. And so thank you for that, right? And so I think as we continue to hear other people, let them say how and why they believe that their ideas and their inputs and our diversity makes us stronger, I think that that's how we continue to grow as a force and how we continue to welcome all of our different cultures in and make us stronger, because for too long we only see things through the one paradigm which we understand. And so if we can start to see things from another perspective, we'll see how that does in fact make us stronger. I think we just have to keep having, and the DNI sensing sessions is one of those conversations that force us to have these kinds of conversations. And I think that it's a really good step forward. We just can't let it be a one and done kind of act.
Well, Chief, definitely. You hit it on, I think, if not, you hit that nail on the head really well. Mr. Oshiba, I'm going to turn it back over to you.
That's really hard to top.
So your best.
That's exactly right. But it all starts, all of us have this responsibility, right, of being daring in our leadership, not being afraid to have those kind of conversations. And like the Chief said, eventually, hopefully get to a place where you're not having to call it a crucial conversation. It's just a conversation, right? it just becomes a part of what we do and how we lead. I think that's when you know we're making progress. But it all starts with, every one of us can make a difference, no matter where we are, no matter what job we have, no matter what position we're in. We can all make a little bit of a difference, and you'd be amazed sometimes that even the smallest little thing, people remember. And I'm constantly amazed that I'll run into somebody that I was stationed with maybe 10, 15, 20 years ago, and they'll say, "Hey, I remember Colonel Oshiba when you did X," and I have no idea what they're talking about, right? But that little thing made a difference. It can be writing a little card to say, "Hey, thanks for doing, thanks for taking charge of this thing," or "Thanks for what you did the other day." It could be just a short email note. I mean, it could be walk over to somebody's office and pat them on the back for something. You just never know what kind of day that they're having, and you never know just what that little bit of recognition, empathy can do to just make somebody's life completely different. And I think it's all those little things that add up, and whether that be from a recognition standpoint, or whether that be from celebrating diversity, I think I don't think it matters. I think all those little things can make a huge difference.
Thanks, Mr. Oshiba. So panel members, what we're going to do is we're going to move to the next question, but there are very close tangential ties in this next question. So if you want to elaborate from the one that Captain Whitlock gave, please do so as I deliver the next brain teaser for you all. So many Asian American and Pacific Islander community influencers, and these influencers include parents, grandparents, teachers, religious leaders, may not think the military and Department of Defense as a career where the youth in our communities can truly find success for themselves and make their families proud. How can we better attract the talented youth in our communities to live a life of service and get more influencers to also advocate for such a career? Again, open to anyone who wants to take this one off. So,
all right, I'll take the initial stab if that's okay.
Yeah, all you. Thanks.
All right, I wanted my microphone to glow early. But essentially, they always say, it's the best time to plant a tree, right? It's today. So, we really need to start with our youth and get to them early, and allow them to see that, there is a spot, no matter which branch of the military service, or whether it's uniform or civilian, that there's a spot for them, right? I think, at least for me, my experience might have been a little bit different, because there's a lot of folks that I know that are kind of in my peer group, plus or minus a couple of years, that had the same experience, right? Their parents were in the military, and so there was that, then therefore it's time for you to serve as well, whether it was pushed on them or or highly encouraged. I think we're going through a little bit of a bathtub right now, right, where we kind of maybe went through a generation that does not necessarily have that's so strong of a push. In the end, we're also seeing a lot of opportunities where our talent's being recruited highly, in the private sector or in other areas, even within the government, right? So I think how do we get them there? I think we just need to keep on doing a full court press. Just as mentioned earlier, events like these, or events, even something as simple as an air show, can't be a one and done. We need to make sure that we approach those things deliberately, make sure that we have the right people on stage. Make sure that they could see themselves, the youth could see themselves like, oh my gosh, that could be me one day. And so, and what, whether that's, a guardian, working in, flying satellites, or whether that's, a pilot out there, flying the latest aircraft, right? So we need to be able to continue to push that. And, really it starts from day one, right? With a strong PA campaign. Over.
Thanks, General Canlas.
Peter, if I could jump in on that, about how do we kind of get the excitement, if you will, or kind of attract folks that this is a great place to work and serve. We're all part of that PA machine when you think about it, because we all have ties to whatever community we're in. And I kind of go back to General Dunstan and what are the strengths the Guard brings. Well, that long-term presence in a single community is a tremendous leverage point. And I think back to back in 2010, I was a group commander in Afghanistan. that was really my first opportunity to work side by side with active duty, guard, and reserve component all in one place, all in this one group that I commanded. And I got to be honest, right? Before I had that opportunity, I had a certain perception about what the guard and reserve airmen bring to the fight. That one experience changed everything for me. I think I walked away from that with what I would say a completely different perspective about the strengths that especially the guard brings, and even reserve, but both because of what they do each and every day in their one unit. The strengths within that unit when they deploy together, the kinds of experiences and expertise they bring from the private sector into the military when they're either doing TR work or on active duty orders and deploying. Just a tremendous value. And again, I go back to my earlier statement. Everybody has value. You just got to kind of figure out what that is and how to plug it in. And it to me was sort of exemplified why diversity is important, because we all have different strengths. And if you figure out how to tie all those strengths together, then we are much more powerful as a team, as a team versus individually. So I just couldn't let that one go. Sorry.
Yeah, thank you for that, sir. And thank you to everybody for all your answers. And I hate to do this, but unfortunately we're reaching the end of today's event. And I'm so sorry. I could listen to you guys talk for the whole day, but we hope that audience members tuning in took note of some of the great suggestions by today's leader panelists. And to wrap up today's program, we asked everyone in the panel to share a final food for thought for either our AAPI members or overall consideration for all airmen and guardians. Ms. Oshiba, can you start us off, please?
Thanks, Joanne. Real quick, what I would say is, again, so first of all, thank you for both you and Peter for everything you guys have done to bring this together. And Chris Bryan, of course. I can't wait to see some of his work later on this month. And for the other panel members, distinguished panel members who we had today, thank you for taking out the time to contribute, tell your stories, right, as we try to waypoint the future. Just remember, everybody has value, and we all contribute something. Don't be afraid to step out. Don't be afraid to tell your story. Don't be afraid to tap into what that one strength that everybody has. I'm sure, and everybody has it. How can you bring that strength into your team to make the entire team that much better? So again, thanks, Joanne.
Awesome. Thanks, Mr. Shiba. I know you got to run, but thank you very much for being on the panel. So we're going to move on to the next member that we have, General Dunstan, closing remarks from you. And I know you also wanted to include some discussion on the previous question. So please offer that for this. I definitely don't want to miss what you have to say, but I do want to make sure that we can give you that time to discuss. So over to you.
Roger, thank you. So going back to the previous question, how do we reach out to our young folks for the future of the Air Force, and then of course administrators, et cetera. And I think the biggest thing there is that I tell you what, Air Force Recruiting Service is doing an outstanding job, and all the things that people brought up as far as getting to folks when they're at a younger age, talking to teachers, coaches, parents, counselors, all those influencers, they are putting in a lot of effort to do that. And I think they're going to be successful, and they got a great plan. There's some great programs, Debt One that looks at rated diversity, Geo Inspire that tasks general officers to go out and talk to these folks, focus recruiting on changing those needles and percentages where we need to increase our diversity across the board or where we're lacking. So that's being done. And I have all the faith in General Thomas and the folks that are doing that. As far as closing comments, not specifically to AAPI, but to everybody. I look at this as like the Air Force as a sports team. We got so many slots, whether they're active duty slots, reserve slots, guard slots, and there are not a lot of extra slots for people to sit around and not do anything. Okay. And it's important that we make sure that everybody has an opportunity here, that they're trained, that they get to go to strength training camp, to speed camp, or what have you, so that when they need to get on the field, that they can play ball. Okay, because someday, you know, it's going to be me that retires, checks out, whatever, and somebody's going to replace me. And we need to treat everybody like that. Okay, and we're foolish if we don't. Okay, and so think about that when you look at all the individuals that you work with. Are you giving them the correct opportunities? Are you communicating with them? Are you leading them? Are you making sure that they're paid, fed, in shape, you know, etc.? That's the way you got to look at this program. And that's, I think, diversity in itself, because it's going to bring us strength. And that's the way we need to solve this problem in the future. Thanks a lot for having me here. You guys did a bang up job. And I look forward to the future, which you guys get tasked with.
Appreciate it, General Dunstan. Thank you so much for your closing remarks. Chief, over to you.
So I really appreciate having had this opportunity today, and I'll close with sort of touching on the last subject, but it's applicable to everybody. In my opinion, as we continue to reshape as a force, constantly, you know, deciding what our end strength is going to be and how we're recruiting, we do turn over rather quickly. Some people serve one term of service, some people two, some people for life. And so we have to remember that every single human being, whether they served one term or to 27 or 30 years, they go back out into the civilian sector as a recruiter of our force. And so how we serve, how we lead, what we do to educate, inspire, and take care of our airmen translates to what they're saying out in the community. And so if we want to recruit more people of different cultures and diversities to come back in and do a better job of helping us be stronger, we have to make sure we're leading and leading well, so that when we release our folks back out into the proverbial wild, they're speaking good things about what we do within the walls of our Air Force. So I look forward to seeing what all we do going forward, and thanks for today's opportunity.
Thank you, Chief, for those motivating words. Wrap us up, General Canlas.
All right. Hey, so I want to say thanks again to the team for getting us a hashtag Beyond Lumpia. You know, this was a great forum again, so really love it. You know, so final thoughts. You know, and I don't want to make a gross generalization, because that's what we're trying to get beyond here. But anyway, you know, a lot of times, you know, within the Asian culture, I think we tend to be very humble people. And with that, though, sometimes I think we take it to the nth degree, and then we end up imposing our own limitations. We impose our own glass ceiling, or as Carl Chen, you know, I like his term, you know, the bamboo ceiling. So, you know, let's not limit ourselves, right? We all, just like as you know, Mr. Chi said, we all have something to contribute. We all have value to give, right? And that means, I mean, you know, the sky literally is the limit. There's nothing that we cannot do as we look at up and down the chain now, right? You know, all the way up to the Undersecretary of the Air Force of having that level of diversity, you know, within our service. So that's a great thing to see. We just need to continue, keep doing that. With that, right? You know, how could we help others understand? We just need to take the time, right? You know, take that time so that people could understand our unique culture. You know, one of the challenges of the Asian Pacific Islander Heritage Month in itself, right, is that the demographic is so wide. You know, to you know, talk about someone who's you know, Filipino is going to be different from someone who had a Korean background, from a Japanese background, to an Indian background, right, and everything in between, right? So even us, even as Asia Pacific Islanders, we need to take that time to listen to ourselves sometimes, and then conversely, we need to take time to listen to others. I think sometimes when we have some of these you know, months or observances, that we, you know, there's a tendency to maybe fall into a little bit of a victim mentality. Right? Let's get beyond that, right? Let's take time to listen to others, because it's important to understand where they're coming from just as well. And finally, you know, I think, you know, the Air Force and Space Force is as inclusive as it's ever been. Could we get better? Yes, we can, right? But this is a great place where anyone could thrive, anyone could reach their dreams. And, you know, as long as you keep doing well and keep doing good things, you know, it's just a great place to serve. And I'm honored to serve each and every day. So thank you.
Great way to wrap it up, sir. Thank you so much. Final thank you to all the panelists for taking time to join in today's discussion representing our community. The Department of the Air Force members and visitors out there, thank you for joining us in our celebration of the heritage and achievements of Asian American and Pacific Islander Airmen and Guardians. The team and I's goal is to set a precedent where we have these unfamiliar conversations and break barriers within our community. So it's really touching to see such a panel of representation. So final thank you again to everyone. And this concludes the afternoon's events. Thank you for everybody for joining us and wish you all have a great day.